Welcome to Life in the Fast Lane, your NASCAR handicapping show. We are here Friday, May 22nd, 2020, live at 2 p.m. Eastern. Of course, you can always watch this show all weekend long on YouTube leading up to the race to get some extra information. And this is the handicapping preview for the Charlotte Motor Speedway Coca Cola 600, the Memorial Day Classic, which will be this Sunday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to have some great information with our two race insiders, as always, Andy Lang and Rocky Atkinson. I'm going to bring them both in right now. Andy, Rocky, welcome to the show. Hope you guys had a great Darlington, and hope you're looking forward to Charlotte as well. First, I want to have a quick recap, guys, of Darlington. You know, it's a very unusual situation all around this week. Of course, they raced twice in 4 days, something that had never happened in Cup history, I don't think, at least for point races at the same track. Now, it's ironic because Charlotte is the one track they race back-to-back, and of course, there's normally the All-Star Weekend, which would have been last week, and then the Coca-Cola race. They will be doing double duty at Charlotte again this week. In fact, this show will normally be on, guys, at Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and that's, of course, what we did earlier this week. But we're doing this bonus Friday show for everybody because there is two races this week. We had Darlington, we have Charlotte, and we'll be back again on Wednesday for another Charlotte preview as they run that second race. And then also next Friday, we'll be back to then handicap the upcoming race for that Sunday. So normally Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern here, but we're doing these two bonus Friday shows this week and next week. So all the viewers out there watching it live, watching it archived afterwards on YouTube, be sure to have those schedules ready for you because we got a lot of NASCAR information. In fact, this is the only sport in town. We talked about it last week or earlier this week on Wednesday. This is the biggest betting sport in town right now. Unless you're into horse racing, maybe some international soccer, this is it. And what a great way to make some money. First, I'm going to start with you, Andy. What was your takeaway from Darlington, first of all? It was a range-shortened race somewhat, as we predicted it might be. A very hectic finish, and really not the true finish that we probably should have gotten based on who ran well, who didn't. Andy, I will start with you. What were your thoughts initially about that finish at Darlington on Wednesday night?
Yeah, you said it. The field was pretty set for most of the race, and we have this crazy pit stop strategy. Kenseth spins around, it throws the entire field into chaos. Everything gets turned upside down. You end up with guys like Brad Keselowski, who it wasn't competitive. Most of the race ends up, right up near the front. And then you have the wreck at the end when Kyle Busch takes out Chase Elliott, and then the rain comes in and the race gets canceled. It was a bad ending. It didn't tell you much about how the race went. It was a big disappointment because I thought the racing was good. I enjoyed watching it, but it was just one of those frustrating, like, NASCAR leaves you like wanting more at the end of the race. Like, we can't finish it, or we can't see the best cars racing it out at the end, but Mother Nature stepped in and said, nope, we're going to end this the way I wanted to.
Well, Andy, the one person that the range-shortened random delay worked well for is our other guest, Rocky Atkinson, because if I'm not mistaken, Rocky, I think you nailed the trifecta in the very first show of the year. I know you had Denny Hamlin as one of your top three. I believe you had Kyle Busch also, and I didn't go back and check. I meant to before the show, but if I'm not mistaken, you might have had Kevin Harvick. Rocky, I'll bring you in. Did you not nail the top three in that race on Wednesday night?
I did, Steve. I had Kevin Harvick, Denny Hamlin, Kyle Busch was my top three. They finished top three, not the exact order I thought they would, but Kevin Harvick, of course, he dominated. He won on Sunday, come back, finished third on Wednesday. Joe Gibbs racing looked good. Hamlin winning on Wednesday. Kyle Busch right behind him. And then Erik Jones had a nice finish in the fifth position, even led a few laps. And Erik Jones was actually my long shot to win.
He was your sleeper pick. I remember that. And he actually had a very good chance to win that race. Ended up with a little bit of damage there late, right before the final laps. He very well could have been the leader when all was said and done. And once again, as you said, another Gibbs car there. Kyle Busch, Erik Jones, Denny Hamlin all could have won that race. And it's just a situation where that team is very strong once again this year. And Truex Jr., of course, was in the mix as well as he was on Sunday. And Andy, I'll bring you back in. If I'm not mistaken, you might have had Chase Elliott in one of your top three. I know we talked about Elliott running better, and that was a very random finish. So to Rocky's benefit for his trifecta, actually hurt our picks a little bit. as Elliott ended up finishing 38th out of 39 cars, even though he was running second late in that race, Andy.
Kyle Busch, you dirty, cheating son of a gun. So Kyle Busch fails pre-race inspection twice on the first Darlington race, and then he takes out my boy Chase Elliott at the end with a completely rookie move, by the way. His spotter's telling me doesn't have enough room. He goes flying into the back of Chase Elliott. And then on top of that, his car gets damaged, and he's going to fall back because he doesn't have the aerodynamics on that right side, and then it gets rained out. So he gets the luckiest second place finish I've seen in a long time. I'm not going to forget that. I'm not going to forget about you, Kyle Busch.
Jimmy Spencer never forgets, and Andy Lang apparently never forgets as well. And I'm just glad you're using the index finger there, Andy, since we are on live video, because Chase Elliott chose to use a different finger when he waited for Kyle Busch to come around. Have you heard, by the way, either of you guys, have there been any penalties, any fines for Chase Elliott? I'm assuming NASCAR is not thrilled with one of their biggest televised events of the year that he's giving somebody the bird.
They need all publicity. Any publicity is good publicity for them. No fines, no suspensions, nothing.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I did a show earlier today out of Nashville. We talk NASCAR all the time, and I was telling them, they were talking about how it was a very heavily bet race. Sportsbooks were saying there was more action than normal. Of course, that's not a surprise because, as I've said several times, it's the only game in town for the next month, and the people want to bet on stuff. They're going to bet on it. They're betting on esports. If they're betting on virtual NASCAR, you got to assume they're going to bet even heavier on real NASCAR. Back in 1979, I believe, the Daytona 500, the entire East Coast was snowbound, and that really put NASCAR on the map at the time. That's when Cale Yarborough and I believe maybe Davey Allison, I might have that wrong, but they had the big brawl in the infield at Daytona. And back when you only got 3 TV networks, half of the East Coast was watching that basically because they were snowed in that weekend. And that was a big boost for NASCAR. And then, of course, Fox taking over in the early 2000s. Earnhardt died at Daytona right after they took over for the first time. A lot of people viewed that. A lot of media coverage there for an unfortunate reason. But Fox got a big boom there through the 2000s. And then, everything kind of died off after the recession of 08, 09. And I've always said NASCAR's never quite come back since then as far as attendance. That's why I think it's ironic now that we're having these races without fans. It might not hurt them that much. If anything, this might actually, since they are the only game in town. Guys, quickly, I want to recap Darlington here. Normally, we'll look more at the upcoming race because that's where the picks are going to be. But it is important for the viewers out there to realize we will still have a Southern 500 at Darlington first week of September, to be the first playoff race as of now. So they will race there 3 times this year. So we got a lot of great handicapping information from these 2 races, although the second one was shorter. It only was about half the length probably that the 500 will be in September. Quickly, though, from each of you, I'll start with you, Rocky. What was your takeaway of maybe your top 2 or 3 drivers from the 2 races combined? I think we probably all agree Kevin Harvick would be one of them. He ran well in both of them. Definitely hard to take some information away from Wednesday night's random finish. But looking ahead for your notebook for the September race, Rocky, who will be 2 or 3 drivers you definitely will have on your radar after seeing how they ran this week?
I'll definitely be looking at Kevin Harvick again. Like I said, he ran good. Won Sunday, finished 3rd on Wednesday. I'll also be looking at Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin runs good there all the time. Very strong. Won Wednesday, so another winner there. And again, I like Eric Jones at this track. So I'll be looking at Eric probably when they come back to Darlington in September.
Yeah, I think those are 3 great picks. And going into the races, those are guys that are on my radar as well. We talked about it Wednesday with Eric Jones as being a bit of a dark horse. He had the best average finish of any driver coming into the week, and he ran well in both races, both as well, top 8s actually in both. Andy, I'll get it to you, and then I'll throw in some thoughts also. I'm sure you agree with those guys. Any other guys that pop to you also as potential picks, maybe even a sleeper or 2 for the September race?
Yeah, he had an unfortunate pit stop at the end, but Alex Bowman was great. Second on the first race, and he was running top 5, top 7 the entire time. He was in the running for a win. And I love guys that have unfortunate finishes, like at the end, but ran great the whole race because you're going to have value on them moving forward. So I like Bowman, and we're going to talk about him going into Charlotte because you can't help but talk about him. But Martin Truex had great cars both races. First race, he was terrible at the beginning, went to the front, and again, he was running great until the very end. Got stuck behind some traffic and in that pit stop stuff. But you look at Truex's finishes at Darlington, and I don't think they were indicative of how good his car actually was, and the same was for Alex Bowman.
Yeah, I agree. I think going into the September race, you guys both touched on it. Hendrick and Gibbs are the two teams that are the strongest. Keselowski looked good at times, but kind of faded a little bit as the race got longer. So keep in mind, the September race will be the longest of all of them. It's 500. The Sunday race was 400. This Wednesday race was supposed to be about 300. It was even less than that. So you definitely want to look at guys that are good in the long run. And Martin Truex Jr. is an interesting pick to bring up because he definitely was better when the cars were out there for longer periods of time, and he has a history of running well in the long run. So I think Truex could be even better in the 500. Hendrick, though, Chase Elliott, second to last. He was running second to first, as we said, before the Kyle Busch took him out. And, of course, William Byron and Jimmie Johnson were first and second at Stage 1 Sunday and ended up in the 30s. And Bowman, as you mentioned, was very good in both races. So Hendrick could be a bit of a sleeper team in September, just if the odds makers don't do their homework. They might not price them accordingly, but all four of those drivers were very strong. Let's move on to Charlotte, though. First, I want to let everybody know out there, we still have one more chance. You still have one more chance to save $500 on the entire NASCAR season. Keep in mind, these two guys were 5-1 last Sunday to start the season. We had a real random race on Wednesday. It benefited some of the picks. It hurt other picks. We're not going to read too much into that, but these two guys are expert handicappers when it comes to NASCAR. And when you hear the analysis and the picks on today's show, you're going to realize that. But you want to get the best bets every week. And you can do so right now and save $500 by using promo code RACE500. I told you on Wednesday you had 2 days left. You've got less than half a day now, midnight. You've got about 10 hours. RACE500. You got 10 hours left to save $500 on the entire NASCAR season. You go to WagerTalk.com for Andy Lang's picks. You go to SportsMemo.com for Rocky Atkinson's picks. Once again, Rocky's picks at SportsMemo.com, Andy's picks at WagerTalk.com, and you have less than 10 hours left to save $500 on the entire NASCAR season by using promo code RACE500. And you're hearing that right here on this show, Life in the Fast Lane. Fantastic offer. These guys started the season 5-1, going to have a huge weekend on Sunday at Charlotte, and of course this coming Wednesday. It's the best time of the year to be playing NASCAR because there's no other opportunity to make money in any other sport right now like there is in NASCAR racing. Okay, guys, with that said, let's get to Charlotte. It's a 1.5 mile speedway.
Hey, Steve, real quick.
Yeah.
Steve, can we do the Ricky Stenhouse thing?
That's right. I'm glad you got that ahead in my notes, and we're moving so far. We have a new segment here, and telepathically, I think I gave it to Andy because as I was watching the race Wednesday, the pole sitter, of course, was Ryan Preece, and he had it by default because they inverted the field. He finished 20th. So by finishing 20th, he got the pole in the next race. And I'd said on the show Wednesday that he actually was going to be a very difficult player to use in fantasy because you get positions gained and lost, and there's no chance he was going to win the race. But at 5,400, maybe a top 10, top 15, he was still worth using. He blows an engine early in the race. Long story short, he finishes dead last. So he had the absolute worst possible fantasy day you could have for the entire season. I thought about this, though, guys. See, I don't think he led a lap. In fact, let me check. He did not. He did not lead a lap, and he went from first to dead last 39. So he had negative 38 positions gained. I doubt he ran a fastest lap because he led the race and still couldn't lead a lap. So basically for NASCAR fantasy scoring, he had 0 points. The only way you could do worse, though, and I did think about this, is there's sometimes 40 cars in the field. So technically, if someone goes from first to 40, they could be 1 point worse than he was. But it's the worst fantasy showing you'll ever have. So anyway, that'll be my Ricky Stenhouse moment. And the reason it came to me during the race is because he blew an engine, went from first to last. And as those of you recall watching the race Sunday, Ricky Stenhouse made half a lap before his car caught on fire. And then Andy approaches me today with the Ricky Stenhouse award idea. And I was like, well, you know, that's pretty appropriate because I've already given Priest the Ricky Stenhouse moment of the race. But I think we'll take it a step further, guys, and we'll do it every week. So thank you for reminding me, Andy. Before we move away from Darlington, I'll let you start. Give me a couple nominees, and then we'll get Rocky's take. Maybe we'll let him decide on the winner. Who's your Ricky Stenhouse moment of the race?
Okay, so this is the Ricky Stenhouse unforced error. He leads the clubhouse in unforced errors on the NASCAR circuit. So a couple of nominees. I do think we have a clear-cut winner for this week. First nominee, NASCAR holds a race that is measured in kilometers. Is a complete unforced error. Next, John Hunter Nemechek wrecks all by himself, the first car that goes out of the race. You mentioned Ryan Preece. We have to throw Kyle Busch taking out Chase Elliott, racing for second. A horrible move. His spotter's telling him you're not clear, and instead he goes flying up into the back fender, sends Chase into the wall, damages his car. But I think we can all come to agreement that the winner of the Ricky Stenhouse unforced error is Ricky Stenhouse, who runs into a tire that Eric Almirola's pit crew member is holding, knocks it out of his hands. NASCAR penalizes Eric Almirola's crew. Then they go back to the tape and realize, oh, of course it was Stenhouse who ran into the guy, knocks the tire out of him. So Stenhouse escapes penalty and then goes out and wrecks himself. So, Rocky, I'll leave it up to you. Who gets the Ricky Stenhouse Unforced Error Award this week?
Definitely have to go with the driver the award is named after, which, of course, is Ricky Stenhouse Jr. Somehow he managed to knock the tire out of Almirola's pit crew's hands. And Almirola was almost penalized for it. Thankfully, he wasn't. NASCAR reviewed it and decided against it. It wasn't their fault. It was Stenhouse. So just another crazy moment in the Stenhouse diaries.
I've got a theory on this one, Rocky and Andy. Keep in mind the 10 car was Danica Patrick a couple years ago, and that's his ex-girlfriend, who I believe is still dating Aaron Rodgers. So I think there's a big conspiracy theory here. I also think Stenhouse bets heavy against himself every week, perhaps. We need to start checking. We all think Andy Lang's moving those lines in the matchups. I'm starting to think maybe it's just Stenhouse moving it. And dumb money is sometimes smart money, you could say, I guess. But yeah, it's remarkable.
Steve, not to interrupt you. Here's the crazy thing. He won his head-to-head matchup because Nemechek wrecks, and Stenhouse somehow runs over a pit crew member and wrecks himself and somehow wins some of his head-to-head matchups.
Yeah, and Nemechek, as you guys know, was one of my two sleeper picks along with Reddick. And yeah, he wrecked earlier, spun out, whatever, had the tire issue there. And he looked like kind of like, my analogy would be a baby deer. He comes out of the pits after they fix the car, and like a lap later, they're showing him spinning by himself again, and he just couldn't even get his footing. But it was really amazing how, for the most part, how clean Sunday's race was. You would think after 70 days off, that would have been the race that was a debacle. But Wednesday night was the debacle. After these guys had a whole race under their belts at the track, they come out 3 days later. We get rain. We get a shortened race. We get a kilometer measured European-style measurement on that. Everything about it was strange. Let's hope Charlotte is a little cleaner for the 600, because the 600 can be a brutally long race, as you guys know. Yet I get a feeling that the funny stuff's going to happen on Wednesday, and as handicappers, that's maybe something we have to take into consideration. We kind of knew going in last Wednesday with the 90% rain chance, the fact they might get it in, but it'll be shortened, a lot of crazy stuff might happen. And it definitely did. So I think it's very appropriate that race spawned the idea, Andy, for the Ricky Stenhouse moment of the race, the Ricky Stenhouse unforced error, because there were several. It's really hard to argue against any of those, though, because Kyle Busch's move, although Kyle Busch is probably as good as any driver on the circuit, that was such a rookie mistake, taking out the number 2 driver. And I do honestly think it was an accident. Let me ask you guys quickly, though, as we get into Charlotte. This is a track Kyle Busch has done great at. I'll start with you, Andy. Do you have any concern using him? I know you play matchups, so you could just stay away from a matchup involving him. That's maybe the best strategy, unless you're going to fade him. But for those out there that play, outright winners, Busch basically came out and said, I'll probably get payback at some point. Something will happen to me. Former crew chief Gustafson, they know each other. Elliott and him are kind of buddies overall. Not maybe right now, but they're not enemies, maybe like Logano or something. Does it concern you handicapping in the near future until you see that rebuttal that, Elliott and Kyle Busch could be difficult to handicap for that reason, Andy? Do you think there could be, some concern there from a betting standpoint?
No, I don't take that into consideration. Chase Elliott is mad, but you have to have the perfect circumstance to go after another driver. You have to be right behind him or right next to him. It has to be in safe conditions. Charlotte can be a pretty fast track. You don't want to put a guy into a wall going that fast. It's one of those things that it's sexy to watch for on TV, but you can't take it into consideration handicapping a race. It will be a non-factor for me betting-wise, but it will be an interesting factor for me to watch for when I'm watching.
Yeah, and Rocky, if you had the conspiracy theory, and like I said, NASCAR is really taking advantage of the limelight right now. They would probably love a little bit of fisticuffs, even though they shun upon it. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But I just don't feel like Chase Elliott's the type of guy that's going to do that either. His father, of course, was a legendary racer, Bill Elliott. He's come up through the ranks, watching racing. I just don't feel like he's going to go after Kyle Busch. Plus, I do think they get along for the most part. Rocky, that aside, are you concerned about it? And I'll also ask you a bigger picture question as we get into Charlotte. What are some of the things you look at Charlotte in general when handicapping the 1.5 mile speedway?
I think Chase Elliott will take the high road. I don't think he'll stoop to that level. So I don't think we have to worry about that. It's like Andy said, it's going to be interesting to watch, to see the possibility of it. But I don't think it'll happen. I think he'll put it behind him, move forward, and try to win the race.
I agree with you. And going into Charlotte here, this is one of the fastest 1.5 mile speedways. I use the term cookie cutter. And for new viewers out there, the reason I say that is because old school NASCAR tracks, my home track is Richmond, which, by the way, that race on Wednesday night replaced the spring Richmond race, unfortunately. So Richmond will have their fall playoff race. Last Sunday's race, by the way, guys, replaced the Chicagoland race. This Sunday, the 600 is the originally scheduled 600. I'll have to look at the schedule to see what next Wednesday's race replace. That'll replace one that was missed probably in late March, early April. But cookie cutter track I refer to as the 1 to 2 mile speedways. You've got a couple 2-milers in Michigan and California. Over half the tracks, half the races of the season are these 1 to 2 mile ovals, and they just basically run around in circles. It's really speed. The same teams seem to do well at these cookie cutter tracks. Kind of the analogy I use with the 1970s baseball stadiums. They're all kind of cookie cutter, circle stadiums. But this is one of the fastest 1.5 mile tracks on the circuit. It's also the longest race of the year, 600 miles, so endurance is very important. Rocky, what are the couple of factors that you're looking into coming into the race Sunday night?
Well, I'll be looking at track history again, of course. They are going to qualify this Sunday, which is kind of odd. They're doing it right before the race. They're going to do it 2:05 p.m. Eastern time. The race, I think, starts at 6 p.m. Eastern time. I normally use qualifying because at some tracks, qualifying is important. At some, it's not. This one, it's more on the important side to me. Not like, well, kind of like a road course. I mean, road course, you want to start up front. But that's pretty much what I'm looking at. The history means a lot. There will be no practice once again. So that's going to be weird again for Charlotte. But I'll be looking at history. I'll check out the qualifying right before the race just to see, who's starting where and who does what at certain tracks, like you said, the cookie cutter speedways. So we're going to be looking at the drivers who do well there.
Yeah, it's an excellent point about the qualifying. In fact, from what I've seen, it's single vehicle, 1 lap speed, which is basically what they used to do, for basically all of NASCAR up until a couple of years ago, where maybe even last year, it's only been 1 or 2 years that they modified qualifying in kind of a stage format. So this will be the old school qualifying, it appears, at least from what I'm reading, that it'll be the 1 lap speed. And Andy, I'll ask you, one thing about qualifying, I normally do not rely on qualifying. I love the practice times because they're in what's called race trim. And once again, to the newer viewers out there, race trim means they have the setup on the car like they're going to race with versus qualifying trim, which is basically just to try to get one really fast lap, but isn't good for a long run. And of course, at a race like the Charlotte 600, the longest race of the season, race trim is much, much more important than just one fast lap. I would assume they're going to probably be qualifying in race trim this week. So, to Rocky's point, I do think the qualifying times will have a lot more meaning here than almost any other track or any other time. Andy, what are your thoughts on that, and what else are you looking at when you handicap Charlotte?
I'll give you a couple stats I got here on Charlotte. If you're talking Charlotte, you got to talk Martin Truex. He's dominated this track. His average finish the last 4 races here is 1.8. So if he finishes second here on Sunday, it hurts his average. So you have to look at Martin Truex. The other stat here, the last two races here, 3 Hendricks drivers are averaging a top 8 finish: Jimmie Johnson, Alex Bowman, and Chase Elliott. So I'll be looking at the Hendricks drivers. With Charlotte, it's 600 miles. It's a brutally long race. I still don't know why they needed to add another 100 miles onto this. I know why.
Right.
This is normally my favorite racing day of the year because you have the Formula One Grand Prix of Monaco, then you have the Indy 500, then you have the Charlotte 600. So in years past, this has just been racing heaven. But there's not a lot of cautions at this track. It's a lot of long runs. So I'm looking at the teams and the cars that seem to get better as the race goes on, and the guys who have the stamina, and I'll be fading the guys who seem to fade as the race goes on. Clint
Bowyer, I saw that one coming, and I had to laugh when Bowyer was your play against in the free matchup on Wednesday, and he led the first two stages, yet he still, I think, finished like 15th. He was way out of the top 10, and that was in only half the distance of what next September's race will be. So, it brings up a good point about handicapping betting in general. Guys like us that do this for a living, do it every day, year long, you'd rather have the handicap correct and lose than get lucky and win. And a lot of amateurs say, I'd rather be lucky and win. And that is so backwards because you want to handicap correctly because 60-70% of the time you're going to win those. And Bowyer once again faded on the long run. So, yeah, if you're concerned about a long run driver, Bowyer's probably not the guy you want to be looking at here in Charlotte, the longest race of the year. So, Andy, I'm going to count Martin Truex as one of your top three picks, I assume. Because I think that I agree with that. Rocky, I'll get a pick from you. We're going to go back and forth. Rocky, let me get a pick from you. But first, one thing I want to point out when we're talking about Charlotte, I meant to mention this earlier. Those of you out there that are looking at track results, be very, very careful because 2 years ago, the fall race at Charlotte is not the same race that you're seeing now. It became a half road course, half oval. They trademarked the term Roval. I'm giving them credit for it so we don't get sued here on the Life in the Fast Lane. You get sued for a lot of reasons living life in the fast lane. I don't want to say robo and get sued for it, but that is a trademark term, I believe, by Charlotte Motor Speedway. But yeah, the fall race is half road course, half oval. So it does somewhat translate. And you look at the winners, Chase Elliott's won one of those two races. And Andy mentioned he is good on this track. So I don't think that's a coincidence. But still, it's very different. And Ryan Blaney won the other one, by the way. And he's also decent on these type of tracks. But you want to throw out the 2018 and 2019 October races or late September races because it's not the same track, everybody out there. You want to look at the spring races recently. And Truex Jr. has won 3 of the last 6 on this track overall in that spring race and the fall race when it was the old track. So, Rocky, I'll throw it to you. Give me one of the drivers that you're looking at as your top 3 finishers for this race on Sunday.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to agree with Andy. Martin Truex Jr. is first on my radar. He has 3 wins, 7 top 5 finishes, 11 top 10 finishes in his 27 races here in Charlotte. His average finish is 14.1 at this track, which is 5th best among all active drivers. Over the past 2 years, his average finish is 1.5, winning 1, finishing second in the other. Amazing results. I'll be looking at Truex Jr. for sure.
Yeah, and just to show how amazing 1.5 is, I never like to use average finish because I always feel it sounds a lot worse than the driver is. I think, last week some of you guys gave your picks and like Kyle Busch's average finish was like 12th at Darlington, and that's probably about as good as anybody's, but it's still not even a top 10 finish. And for a guy like Kyle Busch, you think a 12th place finish is a disappointment overall during the season. So yeah, just to put it in perspective, the best drivers on the circuit usually don't even have a top 10 average finish at any track. So to be 1.5 is insane. And I'm not sure which race it was. It wasn't last year's. It was either the 17 or the 16 race that Truex won, one of the other two. But he led almost every single lap from what I recall. And that was probably over my 20 years, maybe the most dominant performance I've ever seen in a NASCAR race. So that's how good he is at this track. Andy, I'll throw it back to you. Give me another guy who's in your top 3 to look at this week as far as outright win.
Oh boy, outright win. I am going to go, I mentioned the Hendrick cars, so I will throw William Byron into the mix. He's, 25-1, which is
that
crazy.
could actually be your sleeper pick as well. I mean,
Yeah. William Byron's got a good car. If he stays out of trouble, we know his crew's good. We know he's good. We know that he's got the stamina. At 25-1, I thought those odds were pretty out of whack. So if I'm going to take a Hendrick driver, I'll take the one with the longest odds. And by the way, can I just say, pretty good talk on the YouTube channel right now. KJ is cracking me up with some of the chatter going on.
In fact, I'm glad you brought that up, Andy. I don't have that pulled up here. It's on the second one I've hosted, and we didn't have that working on Wednesday. So do me a favor. If you see anything good in there, throw it out to us so we can talk about it. I'll let you monitor that today. That's perfect. In fact, take a look at it here while I get Rocky's second pick, and maybe we'll get some insight from the viewers. Rocky, who's another guy you like in your top three?
All right, I'm going to look at Kyle Busch, actually. He's got 1 win, 13 top 5 finishes, 18 top 10 finishes in his 30 races here in Charlotte. His average finish is 14.6 at this track. And Kyle Busch has an average finish of 2.0 the past 2 years here in Charlotte. So he's been running good here. I'm looking to him to do well again.
You know, what's interesting about Kyle Busch, he's going to run all 4 races over the next 5 days or whatever. He's running the Truck Series, which is back this weekend, the Xfinity, and both Cup races. So he's going to run, I believe it's over like 1,400 miles or something, I heard. And he's won 6 of the last 10 truck races on this track. He's won a handful of Xfinity as well. So, yeah, he's dominant here. He's dominant at a lot of tracks, but there's certain tracks, Bristol, Charlotte, where he's in Richmond, my home track, where he's almost unstoppable. And then what I love about Kyle Busch, a handicapping factor I've used for Busch for years now, is the only time I try to leave him off the card, because it's hard to ever leave him off the card. If he gets a win, I'll find a reason to maybe leave him off. But if he's coming off a loss or back-to-back losses, he's got more energy and fire than anybody. So that's why I asked you guys earlier about how that race finished. You know, with him wrecking Elliott, it worries me a little bit. But normally if Busch hasn't won for a couple of races and he's good at the track, he's almost an automatic play for me. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Andy, I'll throw it back to you, see what kind of information you've got going on.
Yeah, I'll give a couple of just 2020 stats. I'll give you a guy I'm looking to fade and a guy I'm looking to support. I take out restrictor plate races when I do my handicapping. There's nothing you can take away from those. So 5 non-restrictor plate races, a guy I was pretty high on coming into this year. He's been a disappointment. Chris Buescher's average finish is 22.6. He should be much better than that in his car, but he's been bad. So I'm probably looking to go against him. And only one driver average finish in the top 5 in all 5 non-restrictor plate races is, of course, Kevin Harvick, who's just been on an absolute tear. Fading him is an absolute mistake. I will probably be supporting him at some point. There's a guy I like and a guy I don't like.
Yeah, and Harvick's interesting because you had a great stat. I love, by the way, throwing out the restrictor plate tracks. You have to do that. As I said on Wednesday, they're completely random races. Stenhouse has won on these tracks, enough said. And you look back in the day, Michael Waltrip dominated on the restrictor plate tracks. He couldn't even finish top 10 anywhere else. So over the decades, if you look back at the results, and that's why it always cracks me up that the Daytona 500, I think it's very unfortunate, by the way, that the Daytona 500 is considered the Super Bowl of racing because it's the first race in February. It's a completely random track. It really doesn't do this sport justice. So it's very important when handicapping that you take those tracks out. It's also important that you take Martinsville and Bristol out, and probably even Richmond. You know, Richmond's only 3/4 mile. It races faster, but those are short tracks. So there again, when I say cookie cutter tracks, I'm talking about the 1 to 2 miles, and it makes up the majority of these circuit tracks. And that's why I like handicapping Charlotte and these other cookie cutters, because we have a lot of data to look at. And the same teams and the same drivers usually do pretty well at these places. And Kevin Harvick has been an automatic top 10 in every race this season, including Daytona, but definitely at the other tracks. Rocky, give me one more top 3 contender that you think. Let's see if we get you the perfect trifecta again this week like you did on Wednesday.
Well, y'all just mentioned him, Kevin Harvick would be my next pick. He's got 3 wins, 8 top 5 finishes, 17 top 10 finishes in his 36 races here. His average finish is 15.4 at this track. I mean, he's just been incredible lately. I think he's going to be a monster, somebody to be dealt with on Sunday here in Charlotte again.
I'll tell you what, Rocky, give me a sleeper pick also. You were right on with Eric Jones finishing 5th last week. You know, Andy's mentioned Byron already, 25-1. Obviously, you can definitely consider him a long shot. Anybody else you like maybe in that double-digit range for either fantasy or outright winner?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Jimmie Johnson here. Jimmie Johnson, 16-1 to win this race. This has been one of Jimmy's best tracks over the years in his career. He has 8 wins here at Charlotte. 16 top 5 finishes, 22 top 10 finishes in his 35 races here. His average finish is 12.2 at this track, which is very good. He seems to be a man on a mission this year. He and his team put together some strong finishes and look way better than they did last year. This is his last year of full racing. He's also posted some good numbers the past 2 years here in Charlotte with an average finish of 6.5 with 1 top 5 and 2 top 10 finishes in those 2 races. I wouldn't be surprised if Jimmie Johnson didn't go to victory lane in this one.
Yeah, and I think anybody at Hendrick is, Byron is a long shot. Now you've got Johnson, and those are the guys I keep referencing who were running 1-2 on Sunday in stage 1 at Darlington before finishing in the mid-30s. So we have seen Johnson is capable of running with the big boys, which is something we hadn't seen the last few seasons. The conspiracy theory angle, which I'd love to float out there once again, you got to figure they'd love for Johnson to get a win. This is probably going to be maybe the most viewed race of the season for NASCAR. You got to figure it's a standalone Sunday Memorial Day weekend. This used to be Lowe's. He used to be sponsored by Lowe's, and this was Lowe's Motor Speedway, so he always had that conspiracy angle as well. But there's no question this has been as good, if not his best track ever during his career. And the fact that he showed me speed at Darlington Sunday and was able to run with the big boys, I think he's definitely a live contender, which is something I haven't felt for a couple years. And you look at, Tony Stewart's swan song season. He wasn't that good. He got a win on the road course. And I believe Jeff Gordon got one. He got him into the playoffs in his final season. He got that win late. So I do think Johnson gets a win this year, and I think this is about as good of a shot as he has to get one probably. I'll throw it back to you, Andy. I'm going to throw out one dark horse. I'll get your thought on this, and if there's any other dark horses you like. But Austin Dillon popped up to me. Just the fact that he has a win here is a bit of a random win a few years back, but he swept both 2015 races in the Xfinity Series at Charlotte also. So this is one of his better tracks. And, Childress, you don't consider that team with the big boys as far as speed, but I get a sneaking suspicion Austin Dillon, at least from a fantasy perspective, could be worth a look this week, Andy.
I'll go with them fantasy. I can't see him winning.
Sure.
If we get a juicy matchup head-to-head, yeah, I'll be able, maybe we get him against Chris Buescher or the aforementioned Stenhouse, maybe one of those guys, yeah. Can't see him winning, but might be a really good look to see where he qualifies, see if he can get that the positions passed. If he has a bad qualifying run, he's got a decent enough car to where over 600 miles it should be okay. And he's mediocre driver. I consider him. I don't consider him great or good. I consider him mediocre. But if he qualifies in the 20s, I could see him sneaking up into the top 15, maybe top 12.
Yeah, and that's a good point about him finishing. He does seem to finish races. He's usually on the lead lap, and he's always kind of a top 15, maybe top 10 at best, but normally not inside the top 10. But, if you get a call, once again, as we saw on the race Wednesday, if the cautions fly right or something silly happens at the end, anything is possible. Another thing with this race is you always worry about weather because it's so long. I haven't checked the latest forecast, but I know on the East Coast in general, it's going to be pretty clear this weekend, so I'm assuming rain will not be an issue at Charlotte, but that is something to always check with a race like the 600 because it does have a lot of wiggle room to be shortened. Guys, it's Friday afternoon. We're doing this show live at 2 p.m. like we do every Wednesday normally. And by the way, I want to remind everyone, we'll be back on Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern live for the preview of the second Charlotte race. But you only have 10 hours left today on Friday up until midnight to take advantage of the $500 discount for the entire NASCAR season by using race promo code RACE500. Promo code RACE500 gets you Andy, gets you Rocky, get a $500 discount for their season picks. You go to sportsmemo.com for Rocky's best bets. You go to WagerTalk.com for Andy's best bets. Rocky 60 and 31, I believe, for the last 3 years. He had a winning day on Wednesday as well. These two guys were 5-1 on Sunday to start the season before we even did our first show. You got some free information on the show Wednesday. You've gotten some great free outright winners here. And now we're going to get to their specialties, which is head-to-head matchups. Now, it is Friday afternoon. With all the hectic race scheduling here, with all these races being crammed together, most sports books do not have odds up. Some don't even have the outright win odds. In fact, it was interesting, guys. Most of the offshore books still don't have the outright win odds up, but I noticed most of the legal New Jersey books had them up on Thursday, actually. So Jersey kind of leading the way with NASCAR, which is nice to see. Really, none of them have the matchup odds yet. We have seen some of the matchups, but not the actual odds. So I'll ask you guys, just kind of in a casual fashion, if you have something, and obviously it could change based on qualifying Sunday. could change based on the action of the odds and the line movements. But Andy, what's maybe one matchup you've seen or you're thinking might be out there that pops as a possible free matchup for the viewers for Sunday?
Well, first off, I actually can't believe you guys are selling these picks for as cheap as you are. I think Johnny might be having a heart attack. These
Giving it away.
Shout out to Johnny. All right, I'm going to give out a pick that should be paid. It should be a paid play, but because they're not officially released, I'm reluctantly going to give it away for free. This is going to shock you guys. You're not going to believe I'm going to bet against Clint Boyer, but I'm going to bet against Clint Boyer with an obvious pick, Kurt Busch over Clint Boyer. We talked about how Clint's car falls apart as the race goes on. It fell apart in a short race. Now, we think he's going to go 600 miles and have his car get better. Kurt Busch's car was horrible throughout the race, but it got better as the race went on. And here's the stat that just clinches it for me. The last eight races at Charlotte, Kurt Busch is 7-1 head-to-head against Clint Boyer. I look at this one, and I think it's a no-brainer. I expect Kurt Busch to be 8-1 versus Clint Boyer after Sunday's race.
Yeah, I'm glad, Andy, you brought up Kurt Busch, actually, because that's one guy when we were closing out the Darlington segment I meant to mention again as a takeaway. He'll be a play-on driver for me in September at Darlington. He finished third on Sunday. He finished outside the top 10 on Wednesday in that random finish once again. It was only the second time in the past 8 races he wasn't top 10 at Darlington. The only other time was an engine failure. He'd been top 10 basically every other race. So I like Kurt Busch in general. In general, he's teamed up also now, don't forget, with the 42 car, which is no longer Kyle Larson. It's now Matt Kenseth. So you talk about a veteran team. Those two guys won back-to-back championships at Roush Fenway in 03 and 04 as teammates. And now they're teammates on a Coca Cola 600 track, which really takes some veteran experience to keep your car in the running. So I think guys like Kurt Busch and Kenseth, will be in the lead lap in the finish there. They're always strong matchups for that reason. Rocky, what about you? Not a lot of odds out there right now, but any matchup that's on your radar?
Yeah, I'm looking at Jimmie Johnson over Ryan Blaney. Didn't see any odds on it yet, but I think we can get a nice number with that. As I mentioned before, Johnson has 8 wins here in Charlotte, 16 top 5 finishes, 22 top 10 finishes in his 35 races here. His average finish 12.2 at this track. Blaney has an average finish of 24.5 the past 2 years here in Charlotte. In Blaney's 8 career races here, he has no wins, no top 5 finishes, and only 1 top 10 finish. His average finish is 23.5 at this track. His best finish was only 8th here in Charlotte. So we're going to pretty much fade Ryan Blaney and go with who I think is a long shot sleeper to win it, Jimmie Johnson.
Yeah, and as we mentioned earlier, Johnson's been as good at this track as anywhere on the circuit. Blaney has not. And keep in mind, Blaney has one of the 2 Robo wins along with Chase Elliott that I referenced earlier. So hopefully maybe the odds makers or the bettors in general fall asleep and they give Blaney a little extra credit. So you might get a better price on this matchup because of that. But yeah, viewers out there, do not count Blaney's win in 2018, September, October, whenever it was, as a win on this track, because that was half road course. So totally different track. Guys, we're going to wrap it up. This has been a great show as always. We're going to remind the viewers out there we'll be back on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern this Wednesday to recap this Charlotte race and give you more picks for the next Charlotte race on Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern live. Quickly, you have less than 10 hours to go before midnight. Save $500 on the NASCAR season. Use promo code RACE500, sportsmemo.com for Rocky's picks, WagerTalk.com for Andy's picks. Once again, promo code RACE500. Get a $500 discount of these 2 experts handicapping NASCAR at Sports Memo and Wager Talk. It's been a great show, guys. We will be back on Wednesday